Hello and welcome, dear friends, to the first of this year's Turner Winter Series, for which today's conversation begins our 16th year. I'm Maureen Raveno, proud and grateful to serve as Director of Religion at Chautauqua Institution, and grateful to have been associated with this series for these many years. While this series has not been presented by Chautauqua, but rather as a community endeavor, it has been greatly blessed over the years to have enjoyed the gracious and generous hospitality of Chautauqua's Turner Community Center, for which this series has been named, which we have enjoyed into last winter until the series was cut short in 2020 by the intrusion of the coronavirus, which continues to challenge all of us to this minute and going forward for a while yet. We begin today's presentation with great appreciation here in the socially distancing capacity of the Kappa Theater in the Robert H. Jackson Center, as we are coming to you now virtually in a format to which we have all become quite accustomed. We also begin this session prayerfully hopeful to see the overcoming of the coronavirus in the very near future, and may it be so. It is my great pleasure now to begin today's conversation with a brief introduction of our guest, Rolland Kidder, after which I will turn the microphone over to our perennial host and the founder of this series, Jamestown's and the Jackson Center's own Greg Peterson. Rolland Kidder is, in the short description, an American politician and author who was born right here in Jamestown, New York, a community that is most proud to claim him. Just a little bit about him now, though nothing said about Raleigh can ever be insignificant, and you will learn much more in his conversation with Greg. Let's begin with the fact that Raleigh served with distinction in the United States Navy during the Vietnam War. A graduate of Houghton College and SUNY Buffalo Law School, he later served on the American Battle Monuments Commission and the National World War II Memorial Design Committee. And it is this historically relevant involvement and mentoring of this important memorial that will be the primary focus of his conversation today with Greg Peterson, who, as I have said, is our host for this conversation and for the previous 15 years of this greatly appreciated series. Rolland Kidder served us, you will remember, for 4 terms with distinction as a representative of the New York State Assembly, serving in the 181st through the 184th legislatures from January 1975 to December 1982. Also notably, he is the author of A Hometown Went to War and Backtracking in Brown Water, as well as being the author of a well-read blog focusing on news, commentary, and military history. There are, as you can already see, so very many reasons to appreciate who Rolland Kidder is and what his distinguished career has accomplished. And we are about to find out much more. And so it is with great appreciation and absolute delight that I now welcome Greg Peterson and Rolland Kidder.
Rolland Kidder, thank you so much. This is going to be a lot of fun. Let me create a picture scene. The scene is Washington, D.C. The date is Saturday, May 29th, 2004. You're at the base of the Washington Monument. The time is 2 p.m. The current American Battle Monuments Commissioners and former ones, including Rolland Kidder, sit in a VIP section. And it is the formal dedication of the World War II Memorial. Among the VIPs and speakers, aside from Rolland Kidder, Tom Brokaw, Tom Hanks, Senator Robert Dole, President Bush, former President Clinton, former President George H.W. Bush, and the former American Battle Monument Commissioners. Can you describe that scene?
Well, first of all, I think we need to clarify the fact that I was a former VIP. I was not on the rostrum with the people you just described because I had been replaced. I was no longer an active member of the American Battle Monuments Commission, but we had a nice seat to view all the proceedings from. And it was a terrific day. There was probably 100,000 people gathered there to celebrate the official opening of the National World War II Memorial. There were thousands of World War II veterans, many of who are no longer with us, of course, there to celebrate it. And the only thing I would add, Greg, to the ceremonies themselves that day is that later in the evening, our old design group had dinner together, and then we went back down to the memorial at about 10 o'clock at night. And it was incredible. The 17th Street had been blocked off to traffic. Crowds were still walking around between the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, and the World War II Memorial. It was a celebratory, beautiful, wonderful end to a great day. So that is the day we officially dedicated the memorial after it had been completed, and it was an honor to be there.
So this was the conclusion of an odyssey that really started with a press release on April 14th, 1994, where it was announced that you would become a member of a commission charged with what turned out to be the World War II Battle Monuments Committee. As you look back, you just described the conclusion, your emotions of that. As you look back, how did you get involved? How did you get involved in this?
Well, it's interesting that they may have had a news release in April that I was going to be a commissioner, but I didn't get a phone call from the White House until late in the month of May of that year. And I recall it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I'm usually in bed by that time. And the phone rang, and Jane said, "Riley, it's the White House." I said, "Come on, it's the White House. What are you talking about?" And I picked the phone up, and it was the White House. This is Veronica Biggins, Director of White House Personnel, and the President wonders if you'd be willing to serve on the American Battle Monuments Commission. And I had never met this woman in my life. I said, "Well, does McDonald's have golden arches?" I said, "Where do I start?" And well, the bad news is you got to be here next week, and a day after you're here to get sworn in, you're supposed to be on an airplane heading for the 50th anniversary of World War II happenings in Europe. And I said, "I'll be there." And of course, Jane was not going to be left behind. And just to clear the air on all that, when you're a commissioner, yes, they do pay your airfare over there, but your wife you pay for. So, but anyway, we both went and started in 50th anniversary commemorations in Italy, the liberation of Rome on June 4th, and then we went to Normandy for this 50th commemoration of the landings at Normandy. So that's how I got into and how did that all happen? I knew a guy by the name of Daniel Patrick Moynihan. And Moynihan came to Chautauqua County when I was running for re-election in 1976. I think he was running for election to the state U.S. Senate at the time. And we weren't really tight, I guess, but he knew me and of me, and I knew his staff. And when I had been in Italy in 1992, 2 years prior, I'd been to this cemetery, Sicily-Rome Cemetery near Rome. Where Anzio would be the name that people would remember, the Battle of Anzio. And I said, does the Army run this cemetery? Is this a VA thing? Who runs? Oh, it's a separate commission that runs this. So they gave me a bunch of literature on the way home in the plane. I said to Jane, I said, I've been a Bill Clinton supporter. And now he's going to be president of the United States. Maybe I got a shot here. I said, so I basically sent a letter to Moynihan and to Clinton, but I think it was Moynihan's office more than anything else that helped push this thing through. And Lundin, remember, was congressman at the time, so that didn't hurt either. So.
For the camera, explain.
Oh no, this was after Lundin. Sorry. Yeah.
So explain the American Battle Monument Commission, what its charge is.
American Battle Monuments Commission was created in 1923 for the purpose of building permanent burial sites for the World War I war dead in France, Europe, the main country being France, of course. General John Pershing, who was the head of American Expeditionary Forces in the First World War, had been commissioned to build these permanent cemeteries, and Congress said, well, if we're going to do it, we don't want to do it through the Army. We're going to have input ourselves through the Congress. We're going to create a commission. So they created the American Battle Monuments Commission. 11 commissioners appointed by the President of the United States, and you're appointed at his discretion, so you can be replaced by the President of the United States at any time. And some of my fellow commissioners stepped aside for other people to be appointed over the years. I happen to be maybe the longest serving, one of the longest serving commissioners, because I also served under President Obama, so I was on this commission for 14 years. But that was its original purpose. After the end of World War II, cemeteries had to be built, permanent cemeteries for America's war dead. And just as an aside, about 1/3 of all families asked that the remains be sent home for burial in the United States. About 2/3, though, said let them be buried on the lands in which they fell. And so these cemeteries, mostly in Europe, we have one big cemetery in Manila, but you know, people, it's a testament as you go to these places in other countries as to the sacrifice America made in the world to give us the world that we basically have, a world you know, of the United Nations and all the other institutions that have been built since these terrible wars. But you know, I'm a veteran, and I wanted to be on it, and ended up, I got the call from the White House.
So just, you get the call late May, and within weeks, you are now a VIP, and the 50th commemoration in Italy and Normandy, and there's the president, and all these vets, there you are, D-Day, 50th anniversary of D-Day, Rolland Kidder, Ashville, New York. What's your emotion, man?
Well, I'd say I felt like a little fish in a big pond, but it was, you know, it's incredible to be involved in something like the 50th anniversary at Normandy. And if you've never been to Normandy, it's a place I think every American should try to get to, like getting to Gettysburg or a place like that, where many people, we didn't have a huge bloodbath at Normandy, but it was significant. But it was obviously the first invasion of Europe during the Second World War. And the location of the cemetery at Normandy, let me just say this, it's at Omaha Beach. And so a lot of our cemeteries are not at battlefields, but this one is. And when you sit there at a grandstand that's been built, let's say for the 50th anniversary, and the President of the United States is going to be speaking, behind you or to the side of you is the English Channel, 100 feet below, 200 feet below on a cliff that these guys scrambled up on the morning of D-Day. I mean, it's powerful stuff. And one of my recollections of that day is that just as Clinton got to the point where he was going to speak, the sun came out. And a couple of old World War II bombers came clipping in right over the treetops. I mean, it was a very powerful moment, and I was obviously lucky to be there.
So as part of the American Battle Monuments Commission, of which you're now one of 11 commissioners, you at some point are charged with an additional assignment regarding a World War II memorial, and essentially to find a site, select a designer through a national competition, shepherd federal approvals, and construct a memorial. Did the commission actively seek that charge?
You know, when I went on the commission, I didn't really realize we had this charge. I'd been in the cemeteries, I knew what they did relative to the cemeteries. And when we were on the first trip to 50th, I met Haydn Williams from San Francisco, retired ambassador, and he's rummaging around, writing things in a pad there at Sicily Rome Cemetery near Anzio, And I said, Haydn, what are you doing? He said, oh, we might get some quotes or something here that we could use at the World War II Memorial. I said, what World War II Memorial? He said, Congress passed a law last year, Raleigh, that we're supposed to build this thing. I never knew about that. I mean, that's not why I really went on there. But once I found out this was a mission of the American Battle Monuments Commission, I stayed close to Haydn. I said, Haydn, I want to help in any way I can. And, I'm working still in a place called Jamestown, New York, but I can get to Washington and for meetings. And so even before I was officially a member of the committee that was eventually created on the World War II Memorial, it had become obvious to me that this was going to be the thing that our commission was going to be known for, and that would be our largest responsibility. So it started with that, seeing Haydn writing down inscriptions off of marble and granite and at the Sicily Rome Cemetery, and it went from there.
A book which triggered this conversation today is called Tribute to a Generation, Haydn Williams and the Building of the World War II Memorial, authored by David Winkler. And you're all over the book. And both you and Ambassador Williams, Navy guys. Was that a helpful connection between the two of you guys?
Oh, yes, and of course Haydn had been in the Navy in the Second World War, and I was years later in the Vietnam War. And that was, I think, always a good connection that Haydn and I had. But the biggest thing about Williams, by the way, this book, I tried to, along with others, write this book, and at the time I was the executive director at the Robert Jackson Center here in Jamestown. And for a while, the Jackson Center became a conduit for us in this effort. But when Haydn was alive, you've never met a guy who was more of a perfectionist. And I would write a chapter or two and go out to San Francisco, and I thought I'd done great work. Oh, no, you got to change this, you got to change that, back and forth. But at the time I'd done 3 trips or so to San Francisco, I said to Haydn, hey, this isn't going to work. I said, I'm not going to be able to write this book. You're the one that should write it. You won't write it. You want other people to do the work. So we sort of gave up on the effort, and in 2005 it was over with, that particular effort. And then later, one of the things Haydn did before he died was he created an organization in Washington, Friends of the World War II Memorial, that then gave them money when he died to get this book done, and this is David Winkler's product. And, I would just say this about the book. It's probably got more detail in it than a lot of people would be interested in, although the people that are here this morning are probably all historians in their own right, so they might find the detail interesting. There were a lot of commissions and a lot of people that had to be worked with in getting this done, and that is in the book. But I do think that it's an interesting history, because trying to get something built on the mall, the east-west axis of the mall, right between Washington and Lincoln, it was very controversial. And we went through hearing after hearing that it was supposed to be on design, but the opponents to the site would come out. And most of the hearing would be about, you're in the wrong place, you got to move this, you can't be here. And we had a battle after battle after battle on the site. And Williams was, he was a former diplomat, of course, ambassador, and he just nursed this thing along and kept pounding away with it. And finally, we got done. And I think we needed to get this book done, and I commend David Winkler for his work. And some people will find it's maybe too much about the Site and Design Committee and not about everybody. On the other hand, this story is, most people know the Bob Dole story and the Fred Smith story of raising the money for it, which was important. But what the inside story is that we had to find a place to put it. We had to find a designer. Then the designer his design got rejected by the Commission of Fine Arts of the United States. We had to start over again, and that's the kind of story that's in this book.
The goal of the commission was to have a World War II memorial someplace completed by the 60th anniversary of D-Day. I think that was the stated goal. And I'm just going to drop some names because you gave a good overview of the book and the detail, and it is a collaboration of individuals. I mean, there's a lot of individuals who played various component parts, and I'm going to ask you, I'm just going to throw names at you, and maybe give a quick background regarding those folks and maybe the impact on it. Roger Durbin.
Roger Durbin is mentioned in the book, but he was a World War II veteran, lived out in the Toledo area of Ohio, and went to a town meeting with Marcy Kaptur, who was this congresswoman, a representative in Washington, and said, "Where's the World War II memorial?" Oh, she said, "It's over the Potomac, Marines, or the Marine Iwo Jima Memorial." He said, "That's not a World War II memorial. That's a Marine memorial." And she went back, and yeah, he was right. There wasn't one. So she put a bill in, and I think it was 1986 or 7, and it took until 1993 finally to get it out of both houses of Congress and into the president's hands for his signature. So it was quite a pilgrimage there. But Durbin was the guy, and I met Durbin before he died, and his granddaughter was on one of the boards I worked with in Washington.
Marcy Kaptur, you mentioned her name. She's from Toledo. She's the congresswoman of our good friend Doug Neckers.
Yep.
Still is, probably
Yep.
one of the senior congresspersons. But she kept at it, man.
Yep. And right, I would say, Greg, that she is the senior woman serving in the House of Representatives today. She's senior to Nancy Pelosi in terms of seniority. She's not the speaker, obviously, but she's an incredibly good legislator, in my opinion. And she's one of these, she's a type of person, a little bit like Williams was. Once she gets something in her craw, she's not going to let it go. And she wouldn't let this thing go. And finally she got, the senator from South Carolina, I forget his name right now, to be a co-sponsor of it in the Senate. And he was, he obviously had the SWAT in the Senate. And she finally got the bill, but it did become law.
Strom Thurmond.
Strom Thurmond, that was it. Thank you.
Bill Clinton as a player in this act.
Bill Clinton, well, this was a little thing in Bill Clinton's world. I mean, he's dealing with world affairs and, the Congress and passing bills up on the Hill and all the rest of it. But he took an interest in this, and he wanted the site dedicated in 1995. He was going to be running for re-election in 96. And this was, his dad had been a World War II veteran, and he was not a veteran, of course, and so he was probably burnishing his own credentials a little bit by pushing for this. But I think it was a priority in the White House, and he had gotten a commission appointed, and it was quite clear, for example, he wanted to dedicate this thing on November 1995, the site itself. And so every once in a while, the fires would light up, and the White House wants this, or the White House thinks that. And so we're all appointed by him. So yeah, we're going to march. And, that was the way it was.
So October 25th, 1993, he signs the bill creating essentially two monuments at the time, a World War II monument and a Thomas Paine monument, which hasn't quite started yet.
Never been built.
Yeah, there's a plaque, by the way. And you mentioned briefly, but I think maybe I'd like a little more detail, because the book's about Haydn Williams. He was an ambassador, and just a little bit about his personality.
Well, Williams, his personality was he drove to the end zone. But he wanted to also engage other people in that process, and he was good at it. And he also didn't want his name out there too far in front, and he was somewhat secretive in the way he handled things. He would stay in Washington 3 days after we'd have our site and design meetings, making phone calls, talking to this person, moving the chips, And he wouldn't tell us until a month later. Well, I talked to so-and-so and so, and it was sort of like with the book. He wanted somebody else to do it, but he was the guy moving everything behind it. I'll tell you one World War II story about Williams. in December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, Haydn was a construction worker working for a construction company that was working for Pan American Airlines at Midway Island. And the Japanese ships leaving Pearl Harbor shelled Midway Island. One of his buddies got wounded, became a paraplegic through it. And we would go, when we were getting ready to go back after our meetings in Washington, he says, well, I got to tell Roy about this. Well, Roy was the guy that he was playing touch football with when they got shelled that day. And he would go back, and Roy was, I think Roy died, I don't know if he lived long enough to see the memorial actually dedicated, but Williams had this connection to World War II, and what happened to people like Williams is, when the war started, they took the people off of Midway Island, back to Pearl Harbor, and everybody was going in the military. And Haydn was going to figure probably he was going to go in the military, but somebody said, "You're not going in the military. You understand naval aviation. You understand supply. You've been out in those islands." So for the first couple of years of the war, he worked as a civilian in Treasure Island for the Navy in San Francisco. But what they did with those kind of people that were sort of dragged into the war at the beginning, they hadn't been to OCS, they hadn't been to boot camp, but it came to this time, all right, you may end up in the Pacific. You may have to go out there, and we don't want you captured. If you're captured as a civilian without a uniform on, they can shoot you under the, So you're going to be in the military. So he went in as an enlisted man in the reserves. And then in 1944, they said, well, you've had 3 years of college, so now you're going to be an officer. And you're going to Treasure Island, or you're going to Johnson Island, another 700 miles past Pearl, and run the naval aviation, help run the Navy flight operations there. And then they sent him into, the Marianas after the Marines took the Marianas. And he ended up at the end of the war, I think Haydn and a group of, and I've told Phil, who's here today, I think there were 3 groups that Admiral Halsey landed on August 22nd. This is several days before the formal surrender of Japan, which was September 2nd, in 3 different places in Japan. And I think they were put in there to sort of test the Japanese. Are you really going to surrender? What will happen to these people? And they went into Atsugi, they went into Yokosuka, and they went into Kanoya down in Kyushu Island. And I've done some research on this, and I've tried to write an article that might be of interest to, the Naval History magazine or something, but I haven't gotten any bites. I have to get Phil involved more in it. But Williams was in there, one of those groups. And I got stuff that he got when he was in those places, and maybe I'm just trying to nail down a little more of it, but I haven't been able to get to the archives in D.C. or anything because of COVID, so I don't know the total story yet. But that's his history of World War II. A guy comes out of it, having been there, having seen these battlegrounds, having been in Japan before the formal surrender, and he ends up becoming president of the Asia Foundation of the United States, ambassador to Micronesia to negotiate the islands as they were returned in the 1970s to local rule. We'd gotten all the islands the Japanese had north of the equator. The Aussies got them south of the equator. We had to do something with those islands. And so Haydn helped negotiate all that. Ended up at the Asia Foundation, and at the end of his life, he told me in his cemetery, as I mentioned, in Europe, he said, we're going to build this World War II memorial, and if I have it, it's going to be the last thing I do in my life that I think has great meaning, and I'm going to give it my all. And he did. So you ought to buy the book. Naval Institute Press.
In finding a site of which Haydn and you were charged to do, that wasn't always that simple. We know where it is now, but there was suggestions of the Capitol Reflecting Pool, the Freedom Plaza, the Olmsted Rainbow Pool. How did that play out? I mean, there was a lot of...
Well, there's a real process in Washington if you want to build a memorial. It's not easy, of course. And the Commission of Fine Arts of the United States is responsible, is the primary responsible party. And also, all the approvals have to be approved by the National Capital Planning Commission, which is another commission. And but the initiator was the Commission of Fine Arts, and they said, here's 8 locations. They gave us 8 locations we think your memorial could be. Haydn didn't like any of them. And they were in obscure places where people wouldn't gather probably much, and it wasn't, he thought it needed to be in a place of national significance, which to him meant the access of the mall. And before, in January of '95, I was in a group, I wasn't on the committee then, but I made it my business to get to Washington, as I said, because I wanted to be involved in stuff like this. And the van dropped us off over by what's called the D.C. World War I Memorial. It's somewhat between where the World War II Memorial now is and Lincoln. And we just stopped there to see it and view it. And then we're walking back towards the end of the reflecting pool, and we walked by this big sort of dry pool with nothing in it called the Rainbow Pool, built by Olmsted, you know, in the 1920s. And Haydn looked up at Lincoln, he turned it back, and he looked back at the monument, Washington Monument. He said, "This is the access to the mall. This is where this place location should be, here." Well, the National Park Service and the Commission of Fine Arts had given us a place called Constitution Garden, which is towards the White House from this, if you know Washington at all. And they'd build a lake, and this was at the end of the lake, and they thought maybe we could put our memorial there. And Williams finally convinced J. Carter Brown, the Commission of Fine Arts, to expand that site to include another 5 acres or 7 acres, whatever it was, which included the Rainbow Pool. And he said, "Carter, you know, if you'll give us this, we will restore this pool. We'll make this a beautiful fountain again. It'll be a place that people in Washington are going to want to go to." And finally, in July of '95, J. Carter Brown indicated that he could support the Rainbow Pool site. And then in September, after a big phone conversation in August, they officially approved the site. And then, as I said, Bill Clinton came in November and dedicated it. But a lot happened in there. But I think as you read this book on Williams, there's a lot about design in it too of the memorial. But what he thought was his most important role in all of this was finding this site and then making sure that it was kept under great opposition. And there it is today. I mean, you gotta, you know, here's to you, Haydn.
Well, and there was opposition. There was the National Coalition to Save the Mall organization. I think the lady's name was Friedman.
Judy Scott Feldman. I'll never forget her name. Yeah, you talk about Feldman's, I mean, she came out with a statement at one point in time, saying that Friedrich St. Florian's design for the memorial reminded her of Nazi architecture. Oh my gosh, we came out of our seats, and if there was a ceiling there, I'm sure we hit it when she made that statement at a hearing. And but she did everything she possibly could to try and stop it. And at the end, and now we're talking 2001. She brought a lawsuit. I say she, her organization, and it basically stopped the National Park Service from bringing or issuing a permit. Everything had been done, the money had been raised, the design had been approved, the location had many times had been approved, but in the Circuit Court of Appeals, the federal court, just the court below the Supreme Court in Washington, she got this thing stopped. And by that time, we'd had an election, and now George W. Bush was president. So Bob Dole was on a flight because he was very involved in raising the money for it. It was one of the legislators from Texas, I think it was, and coming back to Washington and told him about it. He says, "Well, we got to put an end to this." So a bill went in, both the House and the Senate, saying you will build a World War II memorial where it has been approved through proper authority. That the courts are out of this. That's the end of the story. And I went to the White House and watched George W. Bush sign that law. And the next day, the shovels started moving dirt at the World War II memorial where it now is. It was quite an ending to it, and that's sort of more or less where this book ends. But it was a pilgrimage and a fight sometimes.
Well, part of the fight also included a guy named Senator Robert Carey, Nebraska. He too was one of the outspoken.
Yeah.
What drove him?
You know, Kerry was an interesting political animal. Of course, I was a Vietnam veteran, so was he. I met him once or twice, but I was not deeply engaged with Kerry on this issue. Kerry is, and I think he's still living. He's an intellect. And after he left the Senate, you know, he went and became president of one of the colleges in New York City. I mean, this guy was no dumbbell. I mean, and he was close to people in the architectural community. And by the way, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, he hadn't been too hot for the location or the design more than the location. And architects had made a case with Kerry, Senator Kerry, that this would block the view of the Lincoln Memorial if we were to put a memorial here. Now, our position was, listen, we're building it 6.5 feet below grade, and the architecture is all under the level of the trees, and the vista in front is open. There's not going to be any vertical architecture that shows up that blocks the view of the reflecting pool and the Lincoln Memorial. We spent $200,000 on a video done by professional Hollywood people with planes flying over and everything else that we showed to these commissions and to the press that it would not block the view. You may not like the architecture. You may think, well, St. Florian made mistakes here. And of course, our committee had a lot to say about what the final architecture would be. I guess you started out asking me something, but anyway, that's a story.
Well, you brought him in, I mean, as part of the...
Well, yeah, well, Kerry ended up, you know, here's finally what happened with Kerry. He still had political aspirations. You know, he'd run for president once, I think, and he was thinking about it maybe again. And finally, guys like Dole, who wasn't in the Congress at the time, he was retired, but he had a lot of friends in the Senate, right? And they started pulling Dole aside, and they were World War II veterans, and said, "You're going to be dead, Bob, and you got your memorial, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, didn't you? Well, what about ours? What about the one we should maybe have here in Washington?" And quietly, he started to walk for the exits, and when he saw this video and was finally convinced that the memorial would not block any views or vistas, he backed down. And as a matter of fact, he signed a letter in support, which drove Judy Scott Feldman up the friggin' wall. But anyway, he became a supporter of the memorial. But it was an internal battle within the battle, the Kerry fight, and he finally came over and supported it. And I think Moynihan did as well. But there were issues. I mean, but we had to confront and we had to address.
Part of course, the ongoing, you find the location, you find the design through St. Florian, Frederick St. Florian, which had its own adjustments. And one of them, at some point, that design was turned down at a body, and Haydn Williams, you were with him, was crushed. And all of a sudden, Rolland and Jane Kidder become an active player in creating readjusting the mindset of Haydn Williams by bringing him here to Chautauqua County. Yeah. How'd that all happen?
Well, I would say there's two things in this book that Rolland Kidder is, we might say, proud of, or at least he was there when it happened. One was that day when Williams said, "This is where this place should be." It was a rainy day, January, early in the middle of winter, and I said, "You're right, Haydn. If the World War II is the most significant event of the 20th century, this is probably where it should be." And then in '97, we had selected Frederick St. Florian through a national competition. There had been 406, I think, original submissions. We had a blind jury, which means you present your case and people don't know who it is and they vote on it. And that jury selected 6 finalists. And we gave those 6 finalists $10,000 or $20,000 to spend more money on their ideas. Again, a blind competition. And when they finally voted, the jury, and they picked the name off, it's Friedrich St. Florian, former dean of the Rhode Island School of Design. And he came up with a design, though, which was quite large for the site, because we had wanted to have museums, not museum space, but like a little theater, like the one we're in here, somehow buried in that. And so he built some big berms. It didn't block the view of the memorial of Lincoln, but they were pretty big. And every one was going to be a room of the war, the first year of the war, the second year of the war, kind of, so people could learn something about it. And J. Carter Brown and the Commission of Fine Arts, we've been to the White House with this design. Everybody was toasting everybody, and everything else. And then the next day, the Commission of Fine Arts meets. No, too big, too massive for this site. We will not approve this. The next day after that, Williams comes up with me to Jamestown. I wanted to visit our place on the lake, and he had no place else to go for the weekend, and so we got in a flight for him to go back out of Buffalo, and we drove my car up through the Altoona and, Bald Eagle, although you've been down that road probably on the way to Washington. Ridgeway, Warren, Pennsylvania. Anyway, Bob Jackson, the same route he used to take to Washington. That's the one we went back and forth. And Haydn was angry. I mean, he was in my car. Well, could they do that? They know about anything. Blah, blah, blah. All the work we've been through. And we did everything by the book and so on and so forth. And then the next morning, it was a Saturday morning, we were sitting in our house on the lake, and some of you have been there, and in the breakfast room there. And Haydn says, I got to call Friedrich. It's probably 9 o'clock in the morning, and he'd had coffee, and he had his phone number, called Friedrich, and Friedrich, of course, answers the phone. He's really down. How you feeling, Friedrich? How could they do this? I said, Friedrich, I want to tell you this, and this is the truth, Greg. I'm not embellishing history here. He said to Friedrich, have you ever heard of Oliver P. Smith, I think was his name? And no, I haven't. Well, he was a general of the Marines. 1951, Korea, middle of the winter, surrounded by 300,000 Chinese troops. He's only got 15,000. They're dying every day in this battle in the middle of the winter. And the press asked Smith, or the general, are you going to retreat, General? He said, hell no, we're going to advance in a different direction. Friedrich, are you willing to advance with us in a different direction? A little bit of silence on the line. All of a sudden I see Haydn smile. Friedrich says, yes, I will. Well, we think we can take your lowered plaza and your general concept of embracing arms around this pool of something. That's pretty basic, isn't it? And then go from there. All right, I'm on board, Friedrich said. So from then on, I was on a regular basis every month talking with Friedrich St. Florian and the sculptor and all the people doing the design, because we had monthly meetings after that in Washington. And Haydn would go back to San Francisco, write memos, they'd come in, we'd go to Washington, come back. And the meetings were held, by the way, on weekends, because I was working at the time. I was working in the investment business with Peter Sullivan, and I had a day job. So I'd leave Friday, usually be office at noon, I'd get to D.C. in time for dinner. And then we'd work all day Saturday and Sunday and come home Sunday night. And it was like once a month, once every 6 weeks. And this committee, there was 4 of us, and then became 5 of us. Frank Moore, who'd been in Carter's White House, he eventually came on board. And by the way, one of the members of that group, Greg, and she was here for one of our early youth essay contest times with Jerry Spinelli. Remember that? Helen Fagan, Holocaust survivor. She spoke right where I'm sitting here in this room. She's still alive, 104. She can't read very good, but I sent her the book, and her healthcare aide is reading this book to her now. I mean, she was so angry with Winkler because he wouldn't write it her way. She's like, Williams, nothing's perfect, right? I mean, Helen is still proofreading, I'm sure, her first essay from college. I mean, but finally, her daughter, Judy, said, take her away from this book because it's driving her nuts. So she never, but finally, now that it's done, guess how Winkler ends the book? With Helen Fagan's statement read at Haydn Williams Memorial Service that we held on the National Mall after he died. She couldn't come, but her daughter came and read that statement. And Helen, I just want to say something. I mean, she was a powerful member of our organization and became sort of the conscience of this committee. And I have all the respect in the world for her. And Winkler incorporated her into this book quite significantly, I think. And she deserves it. I mean, she had been involved on the education committee of the National Holocaust Museum before it was built, when Jimmy Carter was president. She had taken on the obligation and headed up a Holocaust Memorial, which was built in Miami, in Florida. And, you don't want to get in front of Helen. It's like being in front of a bulldozer. I mean, sometimes she and Haydn would get into it. I remember, well, this is getting into too much detail, but she had this big thing about there's wreaths on the memorial, on the pillars of the memorial, and they're on every other pillar. Oh, we shouldn't put them on every pillar, she said. They'd be on every other. We had this big argument sometimes. But I'll tell you one thing that Helen wanted, and a couple things on that memorial, and I did too, but it didn't happen because we became uncommissioners at the end of the process. She wanted to put a wreath in stone, a granite wreath, dedicated to all humankind. I mean, 50 million people or so died in this conflict. And she wanted something there. It wasn't just for our troops and for Americans, but for the world, and that didn't make it. And then she wanted a quote from Archibald MacLeish that we all wanted, which basically would have been over these gold stars that represent the war dead who didn't come home, saying, we give you our lives, give them their meaning, they would have said. Powerful poetry. And there's another more mundane quote under the stars today because they got changed. But, I talked to Helen. She's on top of her game, but she's frustrated because she can't read anymore and so on. Well,
there's a aside for the camera. She came and was part of our first, at Raleigh's invitation, young readers.
Yeah.
With,
I don't think there was a dry eye in the place that day. Do you, Greg, when she talked? Can you imagine being 13 years old and the Nazis overrun your town and put your family in ghettos? That you'll go into death camps, and she and her three sisters survived. They escaped by being road workers. And they built roads for the Germans going into Russia. And then when the Russians came back, they built them for the Russians coming back towards Germany. And at the end of the war, they got into the American zone in Austria somehow, and her sister fell in love with a GI, a soldier. He wanted to marry her. She said, I'm not marrying you or going to America unless my two sisters are on board and on the same ship, or I'm not going with you. And all three of the sisters and the GI got on a ship down in Italy heading for New York Harbor. That's how she got here at the end of the war. And
amazing story.
Yeah.
So, as we're kind of...
All right, with me, it's getting late. These people.
Well,
I haven't been going.
Any of these people at all.
All right.
We also have the story about raising the money. You got Senator Robert Dole, you got Fred Smith, and then at the timing of all of this, a movie comes out called Saving Private Ryan. And enter somebody's idea to reach out to be Tom Hanks to be a spokesperson. Do you remember those conversations?
I remember it well. General John Hurling was the secretary of the American Battle Monuments Commission, which is the top paid job in this small commission in Washington. And he was responsible for putting the fundraising groups together. And we failed sort of miserably at the beginning. And finally we got the right people in there and staffed up properly. And then you're right, Bob Dole, I was at In 97, when we had this big thing at the White House to announce the memorial, the one that got shot down, Dole came in. I didn't know he was going to be there. And the president gave him the Medal of Freedom that day. And he made a joke. He said, I thought that I was coming over here to get the keys to the White House. He said he'd run against Clinton in the campaign. You know, this is early in January we were there. But anyway, and it was a wonderful day at the White House. But Dole said at that meeting, the president asked him to. He knew about the ask. And Dole had some conditions on it. This has never been publicized. We had to pay a couple staff members on his staff because he figured time would be required, and there were little issues like that. But his big requirement, precondition, I guess you could say, is he wanted a co-chair from corporate America. Because Dole's a smart guy. He's a World War II veteran. I think he was he was all the way in because of his own being a World War II wounded veteran. But he also knows it's going to be tough to raise the money. And finally, there was several guys, including the president of Coca-Cola and others, said no. But finally, Fred Smith at FedEx said yes. And Fred Smith is not a World War II veteran. He's my war, Vietnam. He was a Marine pilot in the Vietnam War. But he's very much of a patriot and very much for veterans, and he wanted to honor the World War II veterans. And it was a good combination because Smith would make the hard calls. Dole would go out and pick up the checks. Hey, I'll go to the VFW, I'll go down to New York at Wall Street, and I'll get the checks. But I'll give you one example. When Boeing came in with their first pledge for the World War II memorial, it was $50,000. And Smith gets on the phone. I wasn't there, but this story is true. I mean, it's third hand, but Smith picks up the phone and calls the chairman of Boeing. He says, what's this BS, $50,000 for the World War? We built your company in World War II. What are you talking about? He says, I've ordered 20 planes next year from you from my company. What is this? How about $2.5 million? Okay, we'll go with that. You know? Those are what you call the tough calls, right? And Dole and Smith together, though, and then to give it a public voice, the movie came out, Private Ryan, and what a incredible. And I met Tom Hanks a couple times, and he's a down-to-earth guy. Hanks, he's not a prima donna. Doesn't require you to kiss his ring every time he talks to you or anything. And when asked by John Hurling in a letter, he said, I'll do whatever I can to help you. And he became the voice on the radio and everything else. And I'll just want to tell one more Tom Hanks story since you asked about him, Greg. When we dedicated the site, and that was in when we actually, in 2000, and I think it was I could be wrong on this, but let's say Veterans Day 2000, end of Bill Clinton's, he wanted to actually turn some dirt down at the site because the design had been approved, the money had been raised. So we had a groundbreaking. Of course, we were under a lawsuit by Judy Scott Feldman, so we couldn't break any dirt that was there, so we brought dirt in boxes. Oh, this isn't the dirt from here, so we didn't violate any laws or anything. And that's where I met Tom Hanks. And he got up. He was on the program. I mean, I wasn't on the program. Haydn was on that speaker that day. Hanks got up, and he didn't make a speech. He read 3 paragraphs from, what's his name? Phil, you know the guy from Italy, the great writer from Italy. I'm having a brain.
Was it the Jewish writer?
No. To Billy and Joe, that was Malden, but it was anyway. But anyway, he read from this. Young Men or something like that is the name of the book. And
was it the story about bringing the wounded, the dead
it was all about the Italian campaign.
Yeah.
And he was a reporter, and Ernie Pyle, that was it, Ernie Pyle. Ernie Pyle was in Italy. So it was Ernie Pyle's book, Brave Men. And Hanks reads 3 paragraphs. Everybody in the place is crying. He sits down. He doesn't say, I'm Tom Hanks, and this has been I'd like to read about what this war was all about. He reads 3 paragraphs about Captain Olson up on the side of a mountain who gets killed, and that night they bring his body down slung over a mule. They had mules to move ammunition and food and stuff in that muddy mountainous war in Italy. And they sat the body down by a wall, and the soldiers would come off the mountain at night and salute him, pray with him. Oh. So, I get some tears in my eyes just thinking about what it is, but if you want to read a moving 3 paragraphs, read about the war in Italy, by Ernie Pyle and this guy. So anyway, that was Tom Hanks. I mean, he did a lot for us. And they think that the radio ads alone that were done by, with no advertising, we didn't have to pay for them, maybe it brought in $90 million of the 200 that was raised. And Hanks was the guy. He was the voice.
There was a PSA, and this may or may not be this one, which said, "What you did changed the world. Don't let it fade away."
Yeah.
And that may have been part of the.
It's time to say thank you was another thing he used to say in his ads. And we had incredible fundraising, and I would just say this: it wasn't our prime duty with site and design that I was involved with, but one of the programs I got involved with was we decided to raise from the states of the United States $1 for every veteran from World War II that served. Well, there's $16 million was raised. And the state that gave the most was New York State, because we had the most veterans at the time. And that's $2.5 million. And fortunately, Hugh Carey was still on our board.
Yeah.
And Carey and I talked about it. I said, listen, I'm not going to be able to go to Albany to meet with when they're having that joint Veterans Committee meeting. Would you go up? He did. Carey went up and boom, $2.5 million later. And it happened all across the country. I think it was one state that somebody had to give money for them because they didn't formally come in with it. Well, this is for the state of X, and somebody gave them money. But that was a part of the fundraising campaign. It was quite an event. Average Americans gave money. I mean, Walmart came in with $14 million, and it was people at the door going into Walmart dropping $1 in a bucket all across the country. It was incredible.
You've created a lot of emotions in your conversation this past hour, really. And you clearly were at the epicenter of the creation of something we take for granted, the World War II monument. And probably as a sense of closure to this in closing, that could you kind of put into words, you're sitting there again in May of 2004, and you look out and you see the creation in real time of something which you were part of. I mean, just can you put that into words?
Well, you feel elated. You feel that you've been a part of something bigger than you are, obviously. I think in my life, I was in the state legislature, and I was in the county legislature. I served here as an executive director. But as I look back on my own life, I think the most significant thing historically, and it'll have the most lasting impact, is the World War II Memorial. And we build it to last 1,000 years. I mean, we build it so that when Washington is Rome and people are walking down the Forum, they'll say, well, this was done. This is what it was. And I remember it's only going to be stone and bronze. They last forever. We're not doing any fancy stuff, new plastics, electricity going off here and there. No. We have good lighting at the memorial. It's beautiful at night. But It was built to last as long as our nation lasts, you might say. And I think it'll be a reminder, it's in the architecture, that it was a time of national unity, and the country was together. We could use that today, you know. But the logo of Friends of the World War II Memorial, one of the things that Williams got into later in his life, we're all done with it, the memorial's built, now we have an organization to support events at the memorial. What should the logo be for this new organization? Oh my gosh, it went on for 2 years with him, trying to get him to approve something, you know. But finally, he approved the ropes. And I remember over a couple, 3 months, we had these pillars, but they were all standing separately. Well, how do we connect them? Well, there was going to be a balustrade of stone, like a stone wall of some kind, with guilloches, they called it, stuff that went like this and that, and didn't have any, but engraved in it. And finally, St. Florian came in with ropes, tying the. And then Ray Caskey, the sculptor, said, well, what if we make them out of bronze? So the next meeting we go to, we have a model of bronze in front of the stone. It was a no-brainer, definitely. Bronze ropes. And then Carter Brown, I think, and others said, well, we want more transparency. Let's get rid of the stone. So now between the pillars are just the bronze ropes. And if you stand in the middle of the memorial, you can see it ties the pillars together. You know, the unity of the nation. So my parting comment, and thanks all you Chautauquans, I'm sure you've gone to bed by now, but if you're watching this virtually. But if you go to the National World War II Memorial, think about national unity. You can have your picture taken in front of your state pillar, and there's a lot of symbolism at the memorial, and there's stars that represent the sacrifice of those who died. But look up at those ropes. And it was a time the nation pulled together and did something that, had to be done, nobody thought could be done. I mean, supplied not only our own armies and navies and air corps, but the armies of Canada, Great Britain, Australia, Russia. I mean, a lot of men died taking supplies over the top of Norway on ships down into Russia. It was incredible, and I said I was going to wrap it up, but I will say, in terms of the services that provided the troops for the war, one of our final things as a committee was, what should the flagpoles be like that are going to, and we decided to build flagpoles on 17th Street. And the model for those flagpoles are the flagpoles that are in front of Union Station that were done by, I can't think of the architect right now, but anyway, Daniel Burnham. And we went over in a van and looked at those flagpoles in front of you. Oh, boy, they're pretty magnificent, aren't they? Blah, blah, blah. Ray Caskey was with us, the sculptor. And he said, oh, heck, I'll build you some flagpoles. And we took about 3 months of looking at different renditions of flagpoles. But the final cut was it's what is there today. At the base of them, we had to have enough spaces to put all the services, Army, Navy, we put Air Force in, I think, even though it was the Air Corps. But one of the things, Coast Guard, and then Merchant Marine had to be in there. And, excuse me, but anyway, those flagpoles, I look at the bases of them. It's good. It's a good story. So anyway, we've been going long enough, Greg. Thank you for having me. I mean, if you're into, what I think this book might be helpful for are people in Washington who are maybe want to build something on the National Mall or in the Washington area. This is what you have to go through to get it done. And in a way, it would be nice if we had such a book for the Lincoln Memorial. How did that thing get done? It was a swamp. There was nothing there. Joe Cannon, Speaker of the House of Representatives, says, "You're not going to put my Lincoln in that damn swamp." And then he lost an election. They put it in the swamp. And it's still in the swamp, but it's been filled in, right? Now we have what's called the Lincoln Memorial. I mean, it would be nice if Olmsted and Pope and all these guys that were involved in the Lincoln Memorial, but I don't know if there anything quite sums it up, the design and process and how it ended up being what it is. So anyway, I was lucky, I tell you, to be a part of that. And, this is not a perfect book. Williams would have written it differently, but I couldn't get him to do it. Nobody could, right? So it does tell his story, though, and perseverance, strong leadership, and what it can be done if people pull together, sort of like the war, the way we all pulled together to get it done.
Raleigh, we salute you. Thank you for your service.
Thank you for having me. Sorry I got a little long. All right. Yeah.